This is the last footage of Lauren Reed, 27 years old, being alive. When she left the room, she will be never seen again. Her mother was still on the line when it happened. The handset lay face up on the kitchen table. Speaker engaged, call timer running. A chair scraped. A pane shattered. Then only the open channel, breathing, and the soft tick of a refrigerator motor until the connection died. The caller, her mother, dialed again with shaking hands and gave the address. Patrol units were sent to a ground-floor apartment on East Colfax in Aurora, Colorado. By the time lights washed across the complex and doors slammed, whoever forced his way in was gone. Officers entered a space that hadn't been staged or tidied. A window over the sink was fractured. Most glass lay inside on the vinyl, consistent with an outside strike. The sill showed a single muddy tread with a defined heel bar and chevron lugs. A pry mark sat half-moon deep in the sash wood, tight radius, the kind a flathead makes when it slips. On the counter, a phone with a live call log to Mom, duration just under 3 minutes before failure. The back door remained locked. The front chain was torn from soft pine. Screws bent, head imprints left at a downward angle. No purse missing. Car outside, keys on a hook. Her bed was rumpled from earlier, not recent. The scene said, rush, target in mind, exit fast. The mother could say what she heard because she was on the line for the last moments. A knock. Her daughter's voice, calm but forced. A male voice at the threshold. The tone snapped from low to urgent and the call cut. She told officers about the breakup years earlier with a man who never let go of the fantasy that it wasn't over. There had been messages. Then long stretches of silence. Then messages again from new numbers that sounded like him. When she blocked one account, another appeared. None of it rose high enough to keep a case open after the protection order expired. It sat in the background until the window broke. They put a name to the apartment. Lauren Reed. 27. They put a name to the man the mother feared. Marcus Hale. 29. Prior arrests. Misdemeanor assault in a bar fight. A charge for criminal mischief. A violation of a protective order in 2018 involving Lauren that closed when she left the state for work and the order lapsed. Nothing active at the moment of the break. There was no new complaint, no trespass call, no fresh paper to serve. Just a history that looked like it had cooled. It hadn't. Detectives worked the 3 rings they always work: the room, the building, the block. The room gave them prints that smeared, as if fingers in thin gloves had pressed and slid. The building gave them cameras. A doorbell 2 units down, an older dome cam in the laundry room that bled grayscale, and a fresh city-installed LPR, license plate reader, on Colfax feeding partial plates into a server. The block gave them people. A neighbor who heard tires roll slow and stop without idling. A night shift barback smoking by the dumpster who saw a dark pickup glide past the alley twice. A rideshare driver who noticed a man standing under a streetlight and turning his face away when headlights swept. They started with the cleanest artifact, the doorbell lens 2 doors east. At time-stamped minutes before the call dropped, it caught a figure in a cap and hoodie scanning the courtyard. He never rang, but he turned the head just enough when a car passed that you could see the jawline and a crescent-shaped scar near the left ear. The image wasn't court-ready, but it was investigatively useful. When they pushed the frame through their internal face match, no automated hit came back, but the mother's old photos did the work faster. A cropped holiday picture of Lauren with Marcus on a hiking trail, his cap pulled low, the same scar visible if you knew where to look. The LPR on Colfax coughed up a plate fragment in the right window, state, model class, and 3 characters, 7KX, on a dark, late-model pickup with a roof rack. Crossed with DMV and narrowed by make, the list dropped to a handful in the metro area. 2 belonged to commercial fleets. 1 was a salvage title. 1 was registered to a distant suburb. 1 belonged to a man named Marcus Hale. The registration address was a studio in Lakewood that he'd vacated 8 months prior, no forwarding. Parking citations showed the truck parked near a storage facility off Peoria 2 weeks earlier. Officers drove to the storage facility and pulled a manager who lived on site. He allowed a look at gate logs, the plate hit on a Friday evening, unit entry and exit within 9 minutes. The camera that should have seen the driver's face had a spider web across it, unaddressed. They rolled the tape anyway and caught what mattered. The man wore nitrile gloves to open his unit and carried out a small duffel and a cardboard box. He put both in the passenger footwell and left. Time on the gate matched a phone record that would matter later. Back at the apartment, crime scene techs chased Trace. On the broken sill beneath the muddy lug, a brownish smear invisible under ambient light appeared under ALS. A sterile swab lifted it. On the chain plate screws, fine skin cells held enough for a touch DNA attempt. On the vinyl, a plastic shard not from the window, a torn edge of cheap glove cuff. The freezer held nothing unusual. The sink drain caught a hair with no root. None of it solved it then, but it gave the lab work to do. They built a timeline from the last day anyone saw her alive. At lunch, a co-worker in the design office said Lauren left on time. Around 6, she texted her mother about an early night. At 9:30, the mother texted again. Lauren replied with a heart and "Call me when you can." At 10:15, the call began. By 10:18, glass broke and the connection died. At 10:24, LPR on Colfax read out the dark pickup again, heading west at speed. At 10:29, a city traffic cam at Yosemite captured the same silhouette in the right lane. At 10:36, a corner store camera on Havana recorded a man in a cap buying a prepaid SIM and a roll of tape, the brim hiding much of his face, the crescent scar flashing once when he turned to leave. Detectives contacted the clerk and pulled the receipt. The card used was cash load. The store's DVR recorded the plate as the pickup rolled across the lot. The partial filled to full, 7KX742. The truck was Hale's. By midnight, the team split. One group checked old addresses and associates. One obtained exigent data from Lauren's phone provider for historical pings and any last known location. One group sat with the mother to reconstruct every recent contact Lauren had, mapping threats, apologies, and sudden quiet periods. The ping data painted a simple path for Lauren's device. Stationary at the apartment until the call, then a fast movement south along I-225, then darkness, either powered down or in airplane mode. It woke once, briefly, at a rest area south of Castle Rock. A minute later, it died again. That was all. Officers went to Marcus's last known couch, an older friend from a roofing job. The friend said Marcus hadn't been around in months. A neighbor added something better. 3 nights earlier, the dark pickup parked 2 houses down at 2 in the morning. A man sat in the cab with no lights for 15 minutes, then left. The neighbor took a photo because the truck blocked his mailbox. The photo, sent by text, showed plate, rack, and a sticker in the rear window for a local gym where Marcus had a membership years ago. They canvassed the gym. Staff remembered Marcus only vaguely. Attendance records showed his fob scanned once in the last month, exactly 1 day before Lauren's phone later died on the highway. The gym camera caught Marcus at the desk, face visible this time when he argued about a late fee. He wore the same cap, same scar. The timestamp put him in the city 12 hours before Lauren's last call. It collapsed the possibility that someone else with his truck did this. With identification solidifying, they issued a bolo for the pickup and for Marcus. Patrol units checked the usual places: ex-employers, bars he had been trespassed from, a small motel he used when jobs were thin. At the motel, a manager said a man matching his photo paid cash for one night, left no ID, moved the bed to block the door, and departed before dawn. The room smelled faintly of bleach, a detail managers always mention because it stands out when it's not laundry day. Trash yielded an empty SIM pack matching the corner store purchase, and a receipt from a gas station near Monument with a timestamp 30 minutes after Lauren's phone briefly woke at the rest area. The gas station had cameras that rarely work. This time, they worked. The clerk remembered the man because he refused a receipt and stared at the forecourt while the tank filled, like he was timing something. The camera gave a better angle than most. Marcus, without the cap, hair buzzed tight, a makeshift bandage on the left hand. He bought 2 energy drinks and a road atlas. No one carries atlases until they don't want to use a phone. They pulled ALPR hits southbound on I-25 and flagged an image from Rayton Pass that showed the pickup in the right lane approaching the New Mexico line before dawn. At the same time, a bank anti-fraud system pinged on a card linked to Marcus from an ATM in Trinidad. Small withdrawal, odd hour. He was running south and he didn't trust digital maps or large card charges. They called New Mexico State Police and pushed a photo package. Units staged along the corridor while analysts back in Colorado ran Marcus's known contacts south of the line. A cousin in Albuquerque, no recent calls. A former cellmate in Las Cruces, not on supervision, no listed address. A day labor foreman in Santa Fe, surprised to hear Marcus's name again, but not enough to take a call. The manhunt moved in predictable pulses: a hit, a drive, a new hit, a delay. In Las Vegas, New Mexico, a deputy spotted a dark pickup with a rack at a motel on 7th. By the time he circled back, the stall was empty. The desk clerk said a man checked out early and asked for a paper map of Texas. The room trash held a torn envelope addressed to Marcus at a storage unit in Lakewood, the same facility from 2 weeks earlier, and a receipt for a car wash 3 miles away. The car wash camera showed the pickup without a plate for 2 minutes, then with a different plate attached. Stolen. The crew had to add new numbers to the bolo and reseed the highway with fresh alerts. They were close once in Santa Rosa. A state sergeant saw the swapped plate truck, pulled into a merge to set up a stop, and a semi walled him off by accident at the on-ramp. By the time he cleared, the truck was absorbed into a line of RVs and pickups heading east. Eyewitnesses at a truck stop said the driver of a dark pickup with a rack had wrapped his left hand with electrical tape and held it tight against his chest while he pumped fuel. Another witness watched him toss a small item into a trash barrel by the vacuums. When they dug the barrel, they found a phone back cover without a device attached and a prepaid SIM blister card. Later, lab work would tie adhesive residue on that cover to the tape core recovered from the Colfax Corners store bag. In the moment, it only proved he was ahead and shedding anything that might hold a trail. Colorado investigators pushed an alert statewide that Marcus was now traveling under stolen plates and likely moving toward Texas. They requested real-time taps on any card in his name, but he was back to cash. The one digital mistake came from a corner he couldn't sand down: the storage unit. 2 nights before the break-in, he had visited to collect supplies. One of those items, unknown to him, was a low-cost door sensor the facility had installed after a series of thefts. The sensor logged a unique tag for his unit every time the door rolled up. That tag linked to his unit account. Combined with gate logs and the manager's camera, it closed a loop that put Marcus in motion before the crime and gave the prosecutor a clean entry for premeditation later. Witnesses filled in the path. A clerk in Tucumcari watched him buy a prepaid card and a pack of bandages. An overnight hotel housekeeper in Clovis remembered bleach again. A teenager at a convenience store near the state line said the man in the cap had asked which roads had fewer checkpoints and whether US 83 was less crowded. Each recollection seemed minor, but together they traced a diagonal line across maps toward the same destination, the Mexican border. While the southward vector clarified, the home scene tightened. A lab call came in. The brownish smear from the sill produced a male DNA profile that didn't match anyone in the apartment. Preliminary comparison to Marcus's old arrest DNA wasn't instant. That would need to confirm through standard channels. Touch DNA from the chain screws was too light for a clean profile, but suggested a second contributor beyond Lauren. The glove fragment yielded nothing usable. The neighbor's boot tread photo from the sill matched a commercially common lug that Marcus's social media once displayed in a hiking photo 2 years earlier, brand visible. Minor, arguable. It would never carry a case on its own, but it was one more alignment. By the third day, the manhunt crossed into the Panhandle. Amarillo PD flagged a small ATM withdrawal at 3 in the morning. The camera showed Marcus with a hood up, cap pulled, gloved right hand, taped left. An hour later, a truck stop camera south of town recorded the pickup in lane 3, then nothing. Dispatches went to DPS units along US 87 and down to Lubbock, Midland, and further south. He was slipping the net and learning how the net worked while he drove. They pushed the last usable still to every dispatcher. Marcus's face from the gym, the scar bare, and the pickup with and without plates. The guidance to units was specific. Don't light him up until 2 cars are in place. Don't chase if he runs into heavy traffic. Expect abrupt exits and plate switches. Assume he's watching mirrors. They knew who he was. They knew where he was pointed. What they didn't know yet, what no one could say out loud in the briefing room, was whether the person he took when the window broke was still alive somewhere along that long southbound line. Structured to mirror the cadence and evidence-first sequencing of the uploaded example transcript, while fully changing case details, names, locations, and events. By the 4th day, the pursuit widened beyond a state line and a single bolo. Colorado issued a full extraditable warrant for burglary and felony menacing, tied to the forced entry and abduction. The U.S. Marshals Service joined as liaison. New Mexico and Texas DPS units added the truck description with an advisory about plate swaps and a driver with a bandaged left hand. Dispatchers pushed guidance to avoid single-unit traffic stops and to expect abrupt exits at rural interchanges. Analysts back in Aurora overlaid everything collected so far. The plate reads, the ATM withdrawals, fuel stops, car wash cameras, motel receipts, and witness statements. A route emerged that moved southeast in steps, favoring late nights, small towns, and cash-only counters. Every point was small on its own. In sequence, it was a line angled toward the border. Another camera filled a gap. A feed from a way station near Amarillo picked up the rack silhouette at an hour before dawn. The footage was not for non-commercial vehicles, but the camera scanned every lane and held enough resolution to catch the truck passing through without stopping. The plate on the bumper did not match the plate reported stolen a day earlier. The frame bore a dealership logo from a lot in Lubbock. When officers checked that lot, a night manager confirmed 2 plates had gone missing from a disabled pickup on the back row. He had not reported it because he planned to file the loss after inventory. The lot camera caught a man in a hood and cap, left hand wrapped, removing screws from the disabled vehicle and walking away. The posture matched earlier stills. They canvassed a motel in Tulia where a guest paid cash for 1 night, moved the dresser against the door, and left before daylight. The room held a sink with diluted reddish-brown streaks in the basin and a towel missing from the rack. Housekeeping tossed 1 stained bath mat into the laundry. Detectives recovered it from the cart and sealed it. A dumpster behind the building held a fast food sack with a crumpled atlas page torn along the fold at the Texas border region. The tier lines matched the missing page if you aligned the staple holes. It was what a person does when he only wants the bottom of the map. Phone work advanced with two tools. First, a geofence order around the prepaid SIM purchase in Aurora, and the rest area south of Castle Rock forced carriers to produce anonymized device IDs seen in short windows. Most entries were commuters and truckers. One transient device ID appeared at both places. Once near the corner store in Aurora during the SIM sale, once at the rest area minutes after Lauren's phone woke and died. Second, a warrant on registration records tied to that device ID produced a temporary activation associated with a newly purchased prepaid phone, now dark. That link, while circumstantial, put a burner in the suspect's pocket when he took the route south. He learned as he moved. In Clovis, he chose a lodging with no cameras. In Littlefield, he parked away from pumps. In Lubbock, he stopped at a big box store and bought 2 hats, a pack of utility knives, nitrile gloves, and bleach. The receipt came from a self-checkout terminal that recorded only a silhouette. When investigators pulled video anyway, the man adjusted his cap a fraction, and the scar near the left ear flashed once. It was enough to keep the line straight. They were near him twice and missed. In a rural strip east of Lubbock, a county deputy noticed the truck's rack in a mirror while sitting at a crossroads. He pulled out and called the plate. The return did not match because the plate was the second stolen pair. Before a second unit could intercept, the pickup turned onto a farm road, accelerated, and vanished behind grain silos. The deputy found fresh dust and nothing else. Hours later, a DPS unit in Snyder trailed a dark pickup with different plates. The driver signaled a middle lane exit without braking, slid behind a gas station and slipped through an alley that dead-ended for taller vehicles. By the time the unit rounded the block, the pickup re-entered the highway through a service road. The sergeant called off a chase into evening traffic. Back at the origin, lab results weaved into the narrative. The smear from the broken sill in Aurora produced a male DNA profile. The database returned a preliminary association to Marcus's old booking sample from the protective order violation years earlier. Confirmation took a day through formal channels. When it arrived, it tied the forced entry to Marcus's body, not a borrowed truck and not a proxy. The adhesive residue on the phone back cover from the Santa Rosa trash barrel carried a brand-specific chemical marker consistent with a tape roll, later filmed in his shopping bag in Aurora. Each lab result did not resolve the location of the victim, but each closed a theoretical gap the defense might later try to widen. On the 5th day, the line bent south of Midland and Odessa onto US 277 toward Del Rio and Eagle Pass. He avoided interstates and chose corridors with thin patrol patterns and long stretches between towns. That was visible in 2 patterns: gas stops along smaller exits and ATM withdrawals at regional banks in border counties. He withdrew small amounts in the pre-dawn hours, enough to avoid attention, not enough to trigger holds. Cameras at those ATMs showed the same details as earlier. Cap, left hand wrapped, right hand gloved when he touched anything. He kept his head down and his face away from direct aim. A state analyst in Denver plotted refuel intervals based on the pickup's likely range when carrying a rack and weight. Using the minimum capacity and the observed stops, she marked a probable window for his next fuel need. That window straddled a cluster of stations outside Sonora. Texas units pre-positioned. At one of the stations, a clerk later remembered a man not looking at anyone, topping off a tank he had already filled most of the way, then buying 2 plastic jugs and filling them with fuel as well. He paid cash. He drove away with the jugs in the bed under a tarp. the camera caught the tarp corner flipping once, enough to show the rack bar and a gym sticker on the rear glass that matched the one recorded in the neighbor's photo outside the roofing friend's house in Lakewood. That association anchored the identification when plates kept changing. They looked at interior checkpoints. Border Patrol operates fixed posts north of the border in certain corridors. On the sixth day, an agent at the checkpoint north of Laredo reported a dark pickup with a rack slowing near the cones, and then turning onto a known bypass at the last legal moment. Patrols rolled along the bypass. The truck re-entered the highway 8 miles south and kept going. A second report the same day from the Uvalde area recorded a similar pattern. He was testing routes and gauging times. Witness recollections continued to line up. A ranch hand saw a dark pickup parked under a line of mesquite near Camado with the sunshade up, engine off. A convenience store stalker in Carrizo Springs sold tape, and a knife to a man with a hand wrap who asked where the nearest public computer was. A laundromat owner in Crystal City remembered a customer who ran a load for only 10 minutes and left with damp clothes in a trash bag. The owner kept the lint trap contents when officers asked. Later, fibers in that trap were compared to fibers from Lauren's apartment rug and found consistent in material and dye. That would matter at charging, not at the roadside. The final approach was not cinematic, it was patient. A joint briefing between Texas DPS, CBP, and the Marshals set a plan that used cameras most drivers never notice, including inbound and outbound plate scanners near ports of entry and bridge cameras that read VINs through windshields under angled light. The suspect had been swapping plates, but he could not swap a VIN short of a permanent alteration. The team marked 2 likely crossings based on his observed behavior: Eagle Pass and Laredo. A third location, Del Rio, sat as a contingency. Unmarked units idled near lots north of each bridge, watching for a dark pickup with a rack, a gym sticker, and a driver with a wrapped left hand. He nearly threaded the needle at Eagle Pass. He entered a shopping center lot 2 miles from the bridge, backed into a slot with the rear against a retaining wall, and sat. After 20 minutes, he pulled forward, circled twice, and parked again near a light pole. He used the pole to shield a plate swap. He took a plate from a compact car owned by a store employee, installed it on the truck, and left the original plate on the compact's passenger seat, folded once. He then drove toward the bridge access road and merged into the queue for outbound inspection. What caught him was not the plate. It was the VIN check at primary inspection in the rack. CBP cameras in the lane scanned the windshield and matched the VIN to the make and model that Colorado had flagged. The system generated a silent alert tied to the extraditable warrant. The lane officer did not signal distress. He asked for documents he would never receive and pressed a foot switch that triggered a soft tone in a supervisor's earpiece. A second officer stepped into the next lane and slowed traffic. A third officer moved behind the truck's rear quarter panel out of the driver's mirrors. They asked the driver to move to secondary. He hesitated and glanced toward the river. There was nowhere to go without leaving the vehicle and running on foot into a crowded approach. He turned the wheel toward secondary. At the secondary bay, the routine played out as if it were a standard referral. An officer approached the driver's door. Another stopped at the bed. A third angled between front bumper and office door. When the driver opened the door, 2 officers controlled his arms and secured him. He did not fight. He asked for water without making eye contact. He kept the left hand folded against his chest. They seated him on a bench and advised him that a hold existed out of Colorado. He did not answer. At that same moment, DPS units and marshals moved on the truck under a search warrant authorized hours earlier to execute upon detention. The bed held 2 fuel jugs under a tarp, a roll of contractor bags, a length of nylon rope, a pry bar with flaked paint on the tip, a small cooler, and a folded map dotted with pen marks along smaller highways. The cab held 2 hats, a roll of tape, nitrile gloves, a utility knife with a fresh blade, a prepaid phone with the back cover missing, and a paper receipt from a gas station near Monument with a timestamp that matched the camera still where his hair was visible. They bagged everything. The truck went to a secure bay for latent prints and trace swabs. While he sat in secondary, officers photographed his hands. The left bore adhesive residue and shallow abrasions on the fingers. The right was clean except for dried bleach scent. His clothes carried no obvious stains. His boots showed a lug pattern with chevron lugs and a defined heel bar, consistent with the muddy impression on Lauren's sill. Dirt in the treads would later be sampled for comparison. Inside his wallet were small bills, a handwritten list of road numbers, and a folded note with a single out-of-state storage unit address, the Lakewood facility. He carried no weapon on his person. The arrest was booked as a fugitive from justice. 7 days after the window broke, the man at the center of the net sat in a holding room at a port of entry a few states away. He would not be interviewed there. That would happen after transfer. CBP notified Colorado. DPS filed the transport paperwork. The marshals coordinated the hold and the schedule. He said nothing beyond basic identifiers and a request for a lawyer. There was no further movement south. Behind the scenes, the Aurora team pushed to bring the physical case up to the same strength as the travel line. Lab prioritized the towel from the motel in Tulia. The result returned as human blood, female, with enough DNA to compare to a comb from Lauren's bathroom collected on day 1. The profile matched. That tied the suspect to a blood-bearing object on his route south. It did not determine the source of the injury with precision. It did not locate a body, but it moved the case beyond an entry and a disappearance into violent crime. They also finished the sequencing on the adhesive and plastic pair, the phone back cover from the trash barrel and the tape roll recovered from the truck cab. The residue patterns included a unique additive trace found in a specific run of tape sold at the big box store in Lubbock. During the hour, the camera caught his silhouette. Purchase logs associated the tape lot with the self-checkout transaction he made there. That link was technical and would require expert testimony later. For investigators, it added one more knot. Camera pulls continued to fill in his attempt to erase identifiers. A drive-through car wash in Eagle Pass filmed foam sliding off the truck minutes before he parked to swap plates. A hardware store countercam recorded him paying cash for a replacement screwdriver and a pack of hex heads, the kind that bite softer metal better when screws strip. A thrift store clerk remembered him buying a long-sleeve shirt in heat, selecting one with a button cuff wide enough to hide a wrap. None of these single details mattered more than the sum. The sum showed intent to evade and a straight line to a border. While he waited in custody in Texas, a second lane of work accelerated in Colorado, mapping, to a lesser square, the path of Lauren's device and any artifacts it might have left. The rest area south of Castle Rock was searched again with a smaller grid. Crews checked culverts and fence lines. A camera from a private yard along a frontage road captured a dark pickup pulling over for less than a minute on the night she vanished. It did not catch the passenger side or any person exiting. A geophysical sweep of a county right-of-way south of Monument returned anomalies that turned out to be buried trash and metal scrap. A volunteer team walked a flood control channel outside Pueblo with nothing to show. Each negative result is recorded. Each reduced the number of places that would later need public resources. In the days between arrest and extradition, witnesses in the Texas RC were re-interviewed to lock down identifications. Clerks reviewed photo arrays and pointed to Marcus's DMV image or the gym still. A ranch hand described the truck accurately and identified the gym sticker when asked. A motel manager noted a bleach smell again. The small bank ATM custodians provided signed certifications for footage and machine times. The chain of custody for every receipt, every scrap of paper, and every clip was tightened for court. Transport back to Colorado was scheduled at the end of the week. He would be moved under guard to El Paso, then flown under a marshal's contract to Denver. From there, county deputies would handle transfer to the detention center. He would be served with a complaint listing counts tied to the entry, the abduction, and the assault inferred by blood evidence. The interrogation, the charging conference, and the evidentiary hearing would come next. Those would be the spaces where motive statements, timelines inside rooms, and forensic threads would be laid out in order. The work that filled most of the days, the chase, the near misses, the small receipts and camera frames that turned rumor into root and route into arrest, was now complete. They brought him back in restraints 2 days after the port of entry arrest. Transfer went from El Paso to Denver under a marshal's contract, then by county transport to Aurora. He was booked as a fugitive from justice with holds for burglary, kidnapping, and assault pending homicide review. Property from the truck went to evidence. The extradition packet was signed. A public defender was appointed. Detectives scheduled an interview within the standard window. He confirmed identity, gave a current address as No Fixed, and said he had done roofing work in the past month. When the subject of the Colfax apartment came up, he requested counsel. The interview ended. There would be no statement to parse and no confession to anchor the case. The file would have to stand on travel, trace, and the voice of the scene itself. Warrants moved in parallel. One covered a full forensic exam of the truck. One covered his Lakewood storage unit. One covered cloud content for accounts tied to his name and known recovery emails. One covered a historical CSLI pull on his prepaid device ID from carriers along the corridor south. Each order came back with certs. Each added a layer. The truck gave up first. Latent swabs from the steering wheel and gear shift returned to him, as expected. More important were 2 spots under the passenger seat. Faint, presumptive, positive for blood. DNA comparison matched Lauren. Trace from the bed liner produced 2 blue polyester fibers with a dye signature consistent with fibers taken from Lauren's living room rug on day 1. Dirt packed into the chevron lugs of the left boot matched, by mineral distribution and pollen content, a ranch road west of Camado. Not a unique signature, but a narrow band. Adhesive residue on the passenger door trim carried the same additive trace as the tape roll taken from the cab, and the glue haze on the phone back cover found in the Santa Rosa trash barrel. The set formed an internal loop that was difficult to break and cross. The storage unit was a smaller, colder room. Inside were contractor bags, 2 unopened tape rolls from the same product line as the one in the cab, a pack of nitrile gloves, a folded road atlas with pen marks along rural highways, and a box with older items tied to Lauren, a printed photo set from years earlier, a copy of the lapsed protective order, and a spare key to a prior apartment of hers that no longer matched any lock. There was also a small notebook with dates and street names that tracked with the near sightings in her neighborhood in the month before the break. None of these alone was criminal. Together they sketched intention. Cloud returns added context. A dormant email in his name showed password resets from IPs in Lakewood and Albuquerque. A throwaway account created the day before the break-in had a single draft with addresses near Lauren's office and apartment. The draft was never sent. Location history was largely disabled, but 2 images synced from his phone contained XF remnants that placed him at the corner store in Aurora, where the prepaid SIM had been purchased, and later at a gas station south of Monument. The images themselves were frames of a paper map, likely taken to zoom in without folding it more. The timestamps aligned to the route line. The CSLI pull on the prepaid phone ID added a thin thread. The device pinged towers near the rest area south of Castle Rock within minutes of Lauren's phone going dark there. It then appeared sporadically along the US 277 corridor on nights that matched the ATM and gas stops. Coverage gaps were large because the device was likely off most of the time. The few pings that did exist bridged Colorado to Texas and narrowed search windows enough for ground teams to work. Ground searches resumed with tighter frames. Texas DPS coordinated with county teams around Eagle Pass, Del Rio, and the Camado area. They overlaid the ranch hand sighting, the gas receipts, and the tower hits. They added a report from a pipeline crew that had noticed a disturbed patch in a caliche borrow pit off a farm-to-market road west of Quemado 2 days after the arrest. At that time, the crew assumed it was illegal dumping. After the alert, a foreman called it in. Deputies secured the site. A grid was set. Cadaver dogs worked a slow pattern. One dog alerted at the pit. The soil showed fresh backfill. Crews removed layers by hand and recovered contractor bag fragments and a length of nylon rope with a simple knot pattern. Human remains were present. No detail beyond that is useful here. Identification proceeded through dental records obtained with family consent. A partial implant serial number matched Lauren's dental file. The medical examiner set manner of death as homicide and, within the limits of condition, noted blunt force injury consistent with a struggle. There were no findings here offered in graphic terms, only conclusions necessary for charging. With the recovery site active, detectives checked for nearby cameras. A ranch gate camera a mile away had a small card system and had not been overwritten. Reviewing the file revealed a dark pickup with a rack entering the county lane pre-dawn on the night after the abduction and exiting 20 minutes later. The plate was not readable in the dust, but the sticker on the rear glass matched the gym logo already documented in earlier frames. The timing overlapped the prepaid device's sparse tower activity and a fuel receipt timestamp further north that morning. The chain grew a final link. He was served with an amended complaint adding first-degree murder, second-degree kidnapping, first-degree burglary, tampering with physical evidence, and violation of a protection order. The DA's office convened a charging conference. The team laid out admissible blocks in sequence: forced entry tied by DNA on the sill, abduction timeline anchored by the live call log from the mother's phone, southbound route established by ALPR, traffic cams, ATM footage, gas receipts, motel managers, and witness identifications. Physical transfer of blood evidenced in the Tulia towel and the truck interior. Disposal act evidenced by contractor bag fragments, rope, soil, and dogs at the Quemado pit. Recovery and identification, and arrest at the border with a VIN-confirmed truck, burner phone, and materials consistent with flight. Defense counsel filed expected motions. One moved to suppress the geofence results from the Aurora Corner Store and the Castle Rock rest area, arguing an overbroad net under Carpenter. The court held a hearing. The state argued particularized windows, minimization, and necessity given the use of a burner device. The judge allowed the evidence with limitations. Anonymized device IDs were admissible to explain investigative steps. The tie to the prepaid ID and later CSLI would come in with foundation. Another motion challenged the storage unit door sensor logs as hearsay. The state called the facility manager and produced vendor records. The judge ruled the logs admissible as business records. A motion to suppress the VIN match at the port of entry failed. Outbound inspection camera systems and VIN scans were routine, non-investigatory steps at the port. The defense objected to the adhesive trace testimony as novel. The state proffered a lab analyst to explain the additive signature and chain of custody. The court allowed it with a Dauber caution. instructing the jury later on the weight to assign to such niche chemistry. A final motion argued that the recovery site evidence was tainted by media presence. The court reviewed scene logs and found no breach of the perimeter while evidence was collected. The preliminary hearing presented a stripped sequence. The mother described the live call and the break. Patrol testified to the forced entry, the broken chain, and the sill impression. A detective walked through the doorbell cam still of a man with a crescent scar. Analysts tied the LPR fragment to the plate list and then to his truck. Store clerks and motel managers anchored stops and timelines. The Tulia Motel Towel Lab result came in as a match to Lauren. The ranch hand sighting, the caliche pit, and the recovery were laid out with minimal language, just distances and times. The judge found probable cause on all counts and bound the case over. Plea discussion occurred on a narrow track. The DA conveyed that any plea would require a full accounting of the route and disposal and a waiver of appeal on the geofence issue. There was no movement. The case set for trial. Jury selection was uneventful. The panel heard, at the start of trial, that numbers and dates would carry most of the story rather than anyone's memory alone. The prosecution's case-in-chief ran in the order the work had been done. Day 1, the apartment, the forced entry, the mother's call log, the doorbell still, the protective order history for motive context, and the plate fragment narrowing to the defendant's truck. Day 2, the Aurora corner store purchase of the sim, the gas station south of Monument Frame with his hair and bandaged hand visible, the rest area ping data for Lauren's phone, and the first southbound ALPR hits. Day 3, motel receipts, ATM stills with the taped left hand, way station footage, dealership plate theft, and the car wash in Eagle Pass. Day 4, the port of entry arrest, the VIN scan process, the seizure of the truck, and the search findings inside the cab and bed, including fibers, adhesive trace, and blood under the seat. Day 5, the Tulia towel match, the ranch camera entry and exit near the Comato Road, the caliche pit recovery and identification, and the soil comparison to the boot treads. The state closed with the storage unit materials as pre-offense preparation and post-offense intent to evade. Contractor bags, gloves, tape, maps with pen marks, and the notebook of street names near Lauren's routes. Defense cross-focused where expected. They pressed the quality of the doorbell still. They asked whether any other gym sticker existed to confound identification. They suggested the Tulia blood might reflect earlier injury transfer rather than violence. They highlighted that CSLI was sparse and that the prepaid device was not conclusively in his hand at all times. They noted the lack of fingerprints inside the contractor bag fragments, and that plate thefts could be anyone's act. They questioned whether soil comparisons could single out a ranch road as opposed to a broader county band. The analysts answered within their fields. The jury heard repeated reminders about error rates, generalities, and the difference between investigative utility and courtroom certainty. The state's rebuttal was not dramatic. It returned to sequence and convergence. No single frame carried the load. The route line, the internal lab loop, the recovery, and the arrest together formed a closed circuit. The mother's call had started the clock. Every subsequent step was an outbound ring from that moment that never left his orbit. Verdict came on the 4th day of deliberations. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, second-degree kidnapping, first-degree burglary, tampering with physical evidence, and violation of a protection order. The court polled the jurors. Each affirmed. Sentencing was set 30 days out to allow presentence investigation. Victim impact statements were placed on the calendar. The judge remanded him to custody without bond. At sentencing, the court reviewed the statutory structure. The murder count carried life. The kidnapping count, merged for punishment, set the floor. The burglary and tampering counts added terms to run concurrent under the state's scheme. The court noted premeditation evidenced by the storage unit preparations and the pre-offense mapping, and by the modus of flight to the border with swapped plates and suppressed identifiers. The court imposed life without parole. After judgment, the file did not close. The department's case review unit flagged several operational lessons. 1. The storage facility door sensor had been decisive in premeditation. More facilities would be encouraged to log and retain access metadata in standard formats to support business record authentication. 2. The plate swap pattern on the corridor reinforced the need to train field units to look beyond the bumper to fixed identifiers like stickers, racks, and VIN-based cameras at ports and bridges. 3. The geofence orders, when written with narrow windows and tied to specific investigative steps, survived suppression challenges and allowed lawful progress against burner devices. 4. Early family notification and consent for fast access to dental records significantly shortened the time to identification once a recovery site was located. The apartment on East Colfax was rented to a new tenant before trial ended. The mother kept Lauren's plants until they were given to friends. The recordings from the mother's call sat sealed in evidence and were played once in court with the jury present and the public excluded. The recording lasted under 3 minutes. The prosecution introduced it only to anchor the start time for the route. The court instructed the jury on limited purpose. The file noted that the audio would be available to the defense in appellate record, but would not be released otherwise. Appeal notices were filed and then withdrawn after counsel review of issues preserved at trial. The geofence ruling stood on the record created in the suppression hearing. The VIN scan ruling stood on unchallenged port policy. The adhesive trace testimony was not novel enough to carry a reversible error. The conviction became final. The route maps were printed and archived with chain exhibits. The redacted case narrative used for training removed addresses and withheld the recovery detail, leaving only the sequence of investigative acts. Patrol used it in briefings on domestic cases that appear to cool and then restart without warning. Analysts used it to show how small receipts and partial plates can build a line across states when no single data source is complete. There was no recovered device with a message that changed motive or the order of events. There was no long statement after conviction. What remained was the initial call, the broken chain, the pry mark in the sash, the mud on the sill, the cap and crescent scar in a doorbell camera, the truck moving south in fragments, a towel in a motel bin, a pit west of Kamado, and an arrest in a lane pointed at a bridge. The case closed not because any one of those carried the weight, but because together they did, and because the missing pieces were reduced until only one conclusion remained.